Good morning, everyone. Yogi Berra once famously said, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. And the great wisdom in that is that sometimes in life we hit a fork or we hit a challenge. And the worst thing is if you become paralyzed and you don't act. The most important thing is to do something, to move forward. Whichever direction you take, even if you took the wrong direction, ultimately, at least as long as you're moving forward, there's always new opportunities that are going to come your way. In this week's parsha, we find the greatest disappointment was probably ever known to man. And that is when God put Adam and Eve in paradise, in Gan Eden. And life was idyllic. And they were given one commandment, not to eat from the tree of knowledge. And we all know the story. The snake convinces Eve, and Eve convinces Adam, and they end up eating from the tree. And God comes and pronounces some terrible curses upon mankind. And the ultimate curse is, God says, Afar ata bel afar tashuv. As a result of this sin, you originate from dust of the earth, and you will have to return to the ground from which you come. And after this pronouncement that man was not going to be an eternal being, we all ask ourselves, why does man have to die? Why can't we live forever? And the answer is right here. It was because of the sin of eating from the tree of knowledge. But here we find something fascinating. Imagine Adam hearing this devastating news that as a result of this terrible mistake and this great sin, he, his wife, and all future descendants will have to die. The very next verse that says, you are dirt, you are dust, you will go back to dust, you will eventually die. The very next verse says, Vayikra Adam Shem Ishto Chava. Up until then, Adam was Adam, and the woman was the woman, Ha'isha. Right after God says you're going to have to go back to the ground from which you came, the very next verse says, Adam turns to his wife and says, I want to give you a name. You know what your name is? Chava, life. Why? Kihi haita im kochai. He says, Eve, you're the mother of all living beings. God just said that as a result of the sin, they're going to die. Instead of turning around to his wife and saying, Eve, look what you did. You made me eat from this tree and now we're all going to die. You're death. He says, no, you're life. I see the good in you. Yes, we're going to have to return to the earth from which we come. But as a result of you, all future generations will have life. All human beings forever will be alive thanks to you because you're the mother of all living beings. And the very next chapter says, Adam and Eve know each other, which is a form for intimacy, and they have their first child, Cain. And she says, I'm naming the child Cain because I created a child with God. They celebrate what they had, the ability to create life, rather than wallow in the regret and the pain and the disappointment of their failure. And what a roadmap this is for all of our lives. Every life is met with disappointments, with challenges. But either we can fall apart and just wallow and regret what could have been, what should have been, what I could have had. I could have had paradise. Or we could take the fork in the road and say, what's the next turn I can take? Yes, I'm going to have to, Adam says to Eve, we're going to return back to the dust we came from. But I'm not going to choose to dwell on that. I'm going to dwell on the positive. You're the mother of all life. Let's go have a child. Let's create humanity. Let's create posterity. And we're all here today because of that wise decision that Adam and Eve made. Rather than become paralyzed by the disappointment of the news that they would die, they chose to celebrate and create life. It's a famous story told about a shoe company that sent two salesmen to Africa, different parts of Africa. And they said, we want to explore the possibility of opening up, factories and outlets in Africa. So after a couple of months, the first shoe salesman calls back and says, I'm packing up and coming home. They say, why? They say, well, in Africa, no one wears shoes. There's no one to sell shoes to, so I might as well come home. And the next day, the other salesman calls and says, we immediately have to build 5 factories. We have to start importing, thousands of pairs of shoes. They say, why? He says, because no one wears shoes here. There's so much potential to sell shoes here, right? You could always look at the doom and gloom of life, or you could look at the positive and the opportunities. And the first story of the first failure of the first couple of humanity is a roadmap for all of us that, as Yogi Berra said, there's always a fork in the road, but just make sure you take it and keep on moving forward.